So I'm not actually a huge fan of the conventions. I always pay attention, but I've kind of always felt they're more of a formality, and they toot their own horn. And sometimes, you get insanity like the DNC, where it was like a nightmarish Zoom meeting you were stuck in with far leftists, and and then weird speeches and musical numbers. That was funny. It wasn't particularly fun to sit through, but funny. And the RNC, I mean, I kind of selected what I wanted to look at. I obviously know what side I'm on. I wanted to do well, and all it just had to be was, more classy than what the Dems did, and not insane. And it was going to do better. And for the first 3 days, yeah, they were pretty damn good. I mean, I'd say the only major slip up was Kimberly Guilfoyle's speech was like, it would have been awesome if there had been a crowd cheering and she could have been like rallying people, and it would have been more fun and smiley. But instead, it just comes off like the picture of like Rita Repulsa next to her, and I thought, yeah, that's kind of same energy going on. I don't have too much problems with what she said. Someone put the Starship Troopers music to her talking, and like it worked really well. Like, I understand what she was going for. It didn't work in that format. But other than that, everything else was really good. And you know that because that was the thing they latched on to, the left latched onto. They really hated that. And it's like, well, if that's the weak point compared to the pretty much pick up any random 15 minutes from the DNC and you could dunk on it versus just Kimberly Guilfoyle, I think the RNC did pretty good. Now, the last night, to my surprise, was actually the best. And it was the best by far. I'm going to point out three things. The most significant one, and the one that had the biggest, I don't want to say impact on me, but it made me raise the eyebrow the largest. Gang Chen, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but I'm not sure. He's a Chinese dissident. He's got a really crazy story, basically. He spoke out against the Communist Party, and they beat the shit out of him, and they imprisoned him, and all the horrible things the CCP do. He was blind. He's blind. He was speaking, basically reading a speech off of Braille. English isn't exactly amazing. He's still, very much his main language is Chinese. And he just delivered the most heartfelt, dire warning about the rise of communist China I've ever heard, in terms of like it just being like one of those things where if you paid attention, it is extremely serious. And in fact, China did not like this, and we know because they started firing missiles over the islands they militarized and kind of doing more threatening militaristic things near our fleets. They're not happy. They saw this, the CCP saw this, and they know that basically the gig's up and public opinion is going to start to turn against them in the United States. And this guy here, the president of the United States, showcasing a Chinese dissident who barely speaks the language to come up and relay such a dire message about warning about how dangerous China is and how just rooted in evil the CCP are. That was, to me, that was the most significant thing. Now, I don't know if his stuff's going to be, I don't know if his video is going to go viral. But to I think people who are worried about China, they see that and they're like, okay, Donald Trump's taking this seriously, and this guy here, who is not somebody who's political, he's just for one party or another, he just is. He's a person who warns about China. For him to come out and speak and basically say, you need to support Trump because Biden's going to cave to these people, and I'm serious. That's not something you typically see. So to me, that was the most significant. The most heart-wrenching thing, which I think is the thing that's going to have the most, effect, I should say, if it goes viral, like in terms of like, if you had to take an average normie and see one video, one speech, I would pick Ann Dorn. Ann Dorn is Captain Dorn's wife, the late Captain Dorn's wife. He was murdered, I think it was Minneapolis. I don't remember. He was murdered pretty early on in the riots by just, scumbags who were participating in the mayhem. His blood's on the hand of essentially the Democrat politicians who wouldn't curb the violence, who did nothing. They didn't send the police, they didn't send the guard. He didn't need to die. He was killed by basically the ruthless, violent, leftist mob that's out there. And yeah, okay, maybe the guys that killed him were just there, opportunists, but it was all facilitated. It's the kind of violence that the president has spoken out against, and the Dems have basically endorsed up until they realized the polling was pushing against them. And I say endorsed, I mean, in some cases they endorsed it, in other cases they just flatly ignored it. Like, Antifa doesn't exist, and so on, like that kind of stuff. And her coming out and just the way she told her story, and then the fact that she basically told her story and essentially laid the blame at the feet of basically the leftist mob and the direction the Democrats want to take the country. That's going to really, really, really hurt people. I should say that's going to move their heart, and that might push somebody off the fence. Also, somebody who hadn't heard the story of it will be like, what? And then they start looking down the path of all the people killed in the riots, and they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize it was this bad. Because if you're watching CNN, it's a fiery but mostly peaceful protest as they stand in front of, burning buildings and cars. So you just simply might not know what's going on. And Ann Dorn, she lets you know what's going on. Now, I'm not somebody who's a big fan of the sob story person who gets put up. And I'm not calling what Ann Dorn is, her story, a sob story, but what it is. It's emotional manipulation. I hate that. I usually have a really negative reaction to that. Whether it's, Obama using it, or somebody complaining about healthcare, or somebody complaining about, some sort of law, because that's the worst things in history they always go for the emotional appeal. But I understand how important the emotional appeal is because it's effective. And this was something that I already knew Ann Dorn's story, and watching her retell it, I was uncomfortable. Like that had an effect on me, and I already know the details of what's going on. That was, and I'm also kind of hardened to automatically reject emotional appeals, because that they always in the back of my mind, I think, like, hey, this is a form of manipulation, and that made me want to tear up, basically. So that was, I think that was the most effective essentially video segment of the night. The most damning, in terms of like the most effective thing against Joe Biden specifically, was the Mueller family. Their daughter, I forget what her first name was, but basically she was a nurse who was working in Turkey and then had crossed into Syria to help with essentially people suffering from the civil war over there. ISIS captured her, and basically they held her for 18 months, I think it was, raped her, beat her, just every awful thing possible. And the Obama administration, they didn't think it was important to go get her. And they basically recount the story of essentially them going to the Mueller family, the Mueller family going to the Obama-Biden administration and just like pleading with them, like, look, I don't care if we got to pay a ransom, like we want our daughter back. She didn't do anything wrong. She wasn't somebody who was like, she wasn't some photojournalist on a trip who then got, picked up. She was an aid worker working with, a legitimate agency saving people's lives. And she was picked up by ISIS, who are, doing horrible things to her. And there even was a good idea, they knew kind of where she was, because they were also tracking al-Baghdadi. And they were talking about how the first time they went to go get her, it was part of just a larger operation, and basically she had been moved by then. So it was all for nothing, and it was just because they wouldn't pull the trigger on going and getting this captured American. And then they said, which I didn't know, they said, Biden never even called us to console us. Like, he's never even talked to us about this, and we reached out to them from all angles. And then basically they talked to the Trump administration, will you bring the cook killers to justice? And the Trump administration was extremely receptive. And they're like, let's go get this guy. And they did. And they went and they got Baghdadi. And they avenged her. And they brought about justice. And they did it in a way of basically like somebody kidnapped, raped and murdered Americans. And they're part of, I don't care that it's the head of some terrorist organization and that they're this might be politically dicey or whatever. He said, no, we're gonna get the son of a bitch. And he did. And, I knew you could argue that's part of the grander strategy in terms of like, well, Trump was going to be, he was going to be a rabid dog going after ISIS anyway, because that just was his style. But the way they talked about basically how the Obama administration treated them, that was really damning. That was hard to listen to, because it was frustrating. It was like they just didn't seem to care. It kicks their whole compassion. We're the compassionate ones. It kicks that right in the nuts, basically. And it also makes Joe Biden look basically out of the loop and clueless. So there was that. Those are the three things I went to check as in terms of like, I think are going to have effects on people who kind of see them in passing. Now the finale, excuse me, I still got this chest cold. It was a deliberately crafted speech, and it didn't have any of Trump's bombacity. He was still funny and charming, and it was very much a Trump speech. He spoke with his cadence that I'm not a huge fan of. But it didn't have any of the, him being goofy, throwing the hands around, taking really, really cheap low shots, or making really inappropriate jokes, which I've kind of grown. That's grown on me. I enjoy that now, especially when he dunks on the media. But he didn't have any of that. It was actually very measured, and it was good. It was basically equal parts plans for the future, attacks on what the Democrats have done and Biden, and then most importantly, his accomplishments, basically the things they've managed to accomplish. They have to tell these people. They have to tell people in their speeches, because the media is not going to cover them. I mean, they're not going to cover it, and then when Trump says what the things he's done, they're going to say, oh, we're going to fact check it and tell you that's wrong somehow by some technicality or something. They'll fact check opinions too. Like, they're really weird, really just dishonest. They just want you to know. Don't listen to anything this guy says. Don't listen to it. Don't look it up. Don't learn for yourself. Think of it what we think of it. That's what the media's job is, basically, and that's what they've been pretty effective. They've got a good portion of the country completely captivated. I mean, you see Jim Gaffigan's meltdown on Twitter. I mean, that's a prime example of just like total media cult indoctrination, where they don't understand how people are not seeing what they're seeing. It's like, well, expand your information base, actually talk to people. Don't build that castle, that castle of lies is built, and it takes a lot to get somebody out of it. So it wasn't aimed at people like that. I mean, you can see on Twitter, people were just like, no matter what he said, how he said it, it just was like Russia and all these other things. I mean, I literally passed the first Biden sign. I think maybe it was the second Biden lawn sign I've ever seen. And next to it, there was a Black Lives Matter sign. And then next to that it was like Trump is a Russian asset with like the S's were dollar signs. It was like some handwritten sign. And it was like, oh, you poor person. You're in the cult. But this speech was basically to secure people who had recently jumped off the fence and said, yeah, I think I'm probably going to vote Trump. And they watch this speech and they go, all right, I feel secure in my choice. I don't feel like I'm going to second guess it. It was aimed at Tim Pool. And judging by essentially his reaction and the things he's been saying, Trump's clenched it for people like him. And there's many, many, many more people out there like Tim Pool who are liberals who are slowly realizing they have a lot more in common with Trump and conservatives and Republicans, not neocons, but like, people who are in the Republican Party, particularly young Republicans, than they do with these radical leftists. They're finding that we have common values. We may not always have the same solutions, but we at least want to solve a lot of the same problems. And Trump pretty much very securely demonstrated, I should say, he presented basically his argument for why he cares about the things you care about, the things he plans to do because of things you care about, and also basically reiterating what he cares about. And that's enough for a lot of people. So people who are watching to actually like listen, to be like, all right, let me see what this, let me basically be a little more confident in my purchase, basically saying the thought that they're going to vote for him. He for that point, slam dunk. The speech was about 15 minutes, 20 minutes too long. It was too long. At the same time, could he have covered and checked all the boxes he checked without having it be that full length? Maybe not. So I kind of understand it. And maybe the point was for it to be kind of boring because, Biden's whole thing is normalcy, and that DNC was a complete freak show. So having the RNC end on kind of a boring, plain, maybe too long speech, Trump's not. It makes Trump come off as just like more substantive. Like he's a very style. He's a guy who like basically knows like you can have all the substance in the world, but if you don't have enough style, you're not gonna be able to sell it on TV. And he's definitely sold everything on TV, and now he needs to actually be like, okay, I need to show people that I'm not just flair. I actually have substance to what I'm talking about here. The most pro-life RNC acceptance speech I've ever heard. That was unbelievably surprising. Well, I'm saying pro-life, but really anti-abortion. If you're still pro-abortion and it wasn't enough to make you cringe, it wasn't like the bad arguments that they use, and it wasn't slogans and sloganeering and the typical back and forths you hear from pro-life, pro-choice. But it was more of this is why I believe this, and basically it was more than even a call for law. It was a call for cultural change. It's really is the right approach, I think, in terms of getting at least people on the same page of like, hey, what is, what does it mean to be essentially a pro-life Republican, or really what does it mean to be anti-abortion? It doesn't mean you're anti-woman. It doesn't mean a lot of things. And he talked about it, and it was extremely strong, and I was surprised by that. The way the ending occurred compared to the DNC. So the DNC ended, and I know I think it was the first night they did that green screen thing, but it didn't end with the flair. It just was celebrities talking to you like you're at a Zoom meeting. It was strange. Like there was like a host. It looked like it had like YouTube green screen quality documentary to it, and Yvonne Goria was talking. It felt like a poor attempt at what they normally do. Like the talent just wasn't there, and it was like, here, listen to this celebrity. I mean, Billie Eilish talked. It was like, that's not exactly somebody who brings anything to the table that anybody should be listening to in terms of politics and possibly music. But the DNC has made a huge mistake because I think they banked on, we'll do all digital because we have all the tech stuff, and we'll put something out there, and the Republicans, it'll be like a stale, poorly presented mess. Like it would have been like if this had happened in 2008, where they said basically no big gathering conventions in the big super stadium like the way it is, where it's like inside and it's like a convention center and everything's dark and all the TV screens are up and all the people are in there cheering. What you normally see it like. They thought, okay, we move it to digital only, the Republicans aren't going to know what to do. Well, it's very clear that had this happened, basically, if this had happened in 2008, Democrats, the Republicans would have not put anything up. It would have been like John McCain sitting on a webcam or something. And it would have been an utter disaster. And I think they thought that they're dealing with the same Republican Party they were, 20 years ago at this point. They weren't. And by moving things to this digital format and spreading out basically the locations and allowing it to be outside and not have to be as large of an event, they allowed basically the the Trump team to craft unparalleled imagery and pageantry for not only the whole thing, but particularly that ending. That made it basically a speech on the White House. He gets to turn around and say, "We're here," not just "I'm here." Like he gets to have the imagery of that. He gets to have the Rose Garden, the patriotism, the music, the Washington Monument, and then the fireworks with like the opera singing. Like, holy crap! I couldn't believe I've seen more fireworks in terms of like around the city and whatnot, but in terms of like that much intensity at once, that was one hell of an ending. That was, especially for the speech that kind of was putting me to sleep. That ending was like, oh my God. And you compare that to like the Democrats, which was like a couple sparklers going off in a parking lot. This is what that looked like, essentially, compared to what the RNC just did. And that was the imagery battle and the pageantry battle. Normally the Democrats absolutely crush the Republicans, and the Republicans barely keep up. And it's a miracle when they win. In this case, completely flipped. The Democrats, by basically forcing this to be, no indoor traditional convention, instead of having it where you get to compare the inside the convention center to inside convention center next to each other, and if you just saw like a random picture from either one of them, you might not know whether it was a DNC or RNC. Now, when you see a picture of what was the DNC, which was basically a Zoom call, and a bunch of people in cars watching Joe Biden pre-record a speech versus President Trump, and all the different things where the RNC people were coming out and talking like one by one, and the stories like Ann Dorn, and some of them were higher produced things, and then the fireworks and the opera. Like, you're never going to confuse what a picture from the RNC 2020 with a picture from the DNC 2020, because they weren't even close. They're not comparable. Basically, Trump had a celebration. Trump had this is where we want to take the country. This is where we want to, this is what we've accomplished. This is what we plan to accomplish. And this is the things the Democrats are doing. It was a big showcase of imagery. And the Democrats had a Zoom call of unhinged stuff, followed by, basically lectures from, washed up Washington people telling you, how bad Trump is, or how bad you are for supporting Trump, That was, I was actually impressed, and I was like, wow, maybe we do have this going forward, because if we can, as Republicans, if we can do that, every time, and basically have that level of storytelling, that level of imagery, that level of pageantry. I mean, you don't want to burn it out in the sense of like when it starts getting tiring or seeing over the top, you do step back from it. But in terms of the messaging being, the delivery of the message being so on point, we're gonna win elections. And we're gonna win this one, and we're gonna win the ones in the future. And if the Democrats can't get their act together, they're never gonna win an election again. So we'll see what happens in that sense. Now afterwards, and this is what, luckily nobody was hurt. Basically, a bunch of people from these agitator groups were bussed in from their different organizations, and they were basically harassing and attacking people as they were leaving, going to their car, attacking representatives, senators, speakers, just all kinds of people who had just been attending the RNC, and now they were being mobbed, and the cops were essentially doing their best to try to protect them. The D.C. Police chief could have, and the mayor could have gone out of their way to make sure that this did not happen, but they thought that would be really good optics. But instead, what you have is the civility and the celebratory nature of basically a bunch of people celebrating America at the White House with the president, and then outside you've got a guillotine, and you've got basically people screaming and thuggish behavior and threatening and doing violence. It's literally. It's such the stark contrast. You can say basically this is what Trump's about, and this is what the people who don't like Trump's about. If you're a moderate, you get to see those side by side, and the average person who does not like these riots, that's gonna sell them right there. They're gonna be like, okay, you know what? The Republicans didn't do this at the basically at the Milwaukee convention. The Republicans didn't do this, so but the Democrats did. So it's not really a choice between. Biden can say, "Oh, look at it, it's Trump's America." It's like, yeah, but people aren't stupid. They know the context of the people who showed up, and they know why these things occurred, and they know the D.C. mayors at them and whatnot, and they get to just say, "All right, we've got people who love America, and maybe I don't like Trump's style so much," versus people who are, rioting and setting up guillotines and attacking senators and things like that. One strikingly interesting thing that occurred is that the people who attacked Rand Paul, apparently he was trying to walk like 2 blocks or something to get to his hotel, and they tracked him down. And that was the thing, like the people who were getting harassed, like that was actually not as close to the White House as I thought it was. Like it was people had gotten in taxis, went to places, and then were trying to go back to their hotels, and they were confronted by like violent groups of people. And it was like, whoa. How did that happen? This was more planned out than I think we even initially expected. But the people attacking Rand Paul are yelling, "Say her name." They're yelling about Breonna Taylor. And they have absolutely no idea that Rand Paul was one of the first people to say Breonna Taylor's names, because he spoke out about the no-knock warrants, which essentially no-knock warrant is what led to her unjust death. Republicans were first to bring that to the floor. The Second Amendment community was the first to talk about that essentially killing by the state of Breonna Taylor. And Rand Paul introduced basically a bill that was going to ban no-knock warrants, named after Breonna Taylor. So you got a bunch of people who not only are angry and passionate and violent, they're also incredibly uninformed to be screaming at him and say that to him. To like Rand Paul, but the fact that the people were screaming at him for something that he actually had taken action on, criminal justice reform and whatnot, shows that their anger is not only unrighteous, it is misplaced, and it makes them look like fools. It makes it pretty clear to people who look at it that they're the ones who have been manipulated, and that basically it makes basically the whole narrative of basically people getting whipped up in a frenzy by essentially the media lying to them. It's a prime example of that everyone can see. So that was the RNC. It was good. I mean, is there things that could have been better? Yeah, but I mean, you got to compare it to the DNC, and Donald Trump may have clenched his nomination, or I should say clenched his victory. Between the riots, the RNC, like it seems like from early polls he's getting his popularity boost, and Biden didn't move at all. And now they're readjusting the way they're taking the numbers and stuff, and CNN's starting to freak out. They're like, "Oh my God, he's within 1 point of Biden, or he's two points ahead in a swing state or something." Like, they're really freaking out. And I mean, me just driving around, I'm in southeast Pennsylvania. We're a blue state. I mean, we went for him last time, but that was pretty much rural people stepping up. But we're in the suburbs in Philadelphia where they are like diehard Democrat to the point of like full TDS. I mean, you throw a rock and you're going to run into somebody who just freaks out and is crazy leftist. But I've seen, like I said, 2 Biden signs. One was yesterday. The other was, I guess, a couple months ago. And I cannot tell you the amount of Trump signs I've seen, Trump flags, Trump signs, and even things like "We stand with the whatever police of whatever local department they have," which is as good as this Trump sign. Because that person, if they're not voting for Trump, they're definitely not voting for Biden. There's nobody who associates essentially standing with police departments and the Democrats right now. It's unbelievable the amount of support. I mean, I saw a good amount of it last time, especially when I went up to like Lancaster. I was surprised. I was like, wow, there's Trump signs everywhere. And that was, some people said they knew he was going to win when they saw that. And I was like, yeah, I don't know about that. Because, basically the suburbs vote pretty heavily, and they usually go heavily left. And people generally around the suburbs, you'll see occasional signs for Republicans, but in general, it's not. It's usually just a split. You'll see signs for a Republican incumbent who's like a local politician, but you really won't see like national stuff or support the police and things like that. Like signs that are like more politically conservative. that has completely changed this year. I've never seen the amount of Trump flags, Trump signs, Trump banners. Just in my town alone, they're all over the place. And I'm in Hapro, which is next to like Horsham, which is one of the like pretty far left. And we've got a crazy mayor who's put up the trans rights flag. It's like the rainbow with like the trans diamond and then like the racial thing. Like that's literally flying next to the American flag at the entrance of our town. That's identitarian politics, the kind of stuff that conservatives absolutely hate. That's the mayor we have, and I have not seen or found a Biden sign in my town, but there are dozens and dozens of Trump displays, and that's just utterly shocking to me. So, good signs, but you got to show up and vote. You got to show up and vote, because if you don't show up and vote, it doesn't matter. You can't say, oh, it looks like he's going to win by a landslide. So I'm just going to sit it out. It's like, no, don't do that, because you got to remember, you got a 15-point headwind because of the media, and you've also got cheating, and I mean that in a sense of, would you cheat to stop evil Orange Hitler? Well, some people would, and other people who would, the people who believe that he is in fact evil Trump Hitler, there's enough of them to make an impact in terms of doing shady stuff. Sorry, that's just how it is. We have to overcome that. So we have to, so even if you're that extra 100 plus vote that puts him over the edge, you're not the one that breaks the back. You got to remember, there's going to be votes that just disappear, and there's going to be votes that are fabricated going the other way, and you have to counter those too. It's not fair, but such is life. But whatever. Other than the mail-in ballot fiasco stuff, I'm gonna follow, and essentially I'm worried about that screwing everything up. Looks like we're in good shape moving forward. We'll have to see where things go over the next couple weeks. I think between now and the election is going to go really fast. I don't expect Trump and Biden to debate. I do not expect that to occur, because I think I thought at first, I was like, he has to at least do it once, right? And then he's just going to complain and then not do it again, right? Like they'll pump him with drugs or something, and he'll be fine for at least one thing, because all he has to do is come off as like an old man and Trump like a bully, and then they can just play victim, right? But that's looking like less and less the case. When I found out Biden's acceptance speech was pre-recorded, that was a sign. And then when Pelosi came out and said, well, she's now toting the line of, I don't think Joe Biden should dignify Trump with a debate. Yeah, there's something going on. We'll find out. I don't expect there's going to be a debate. And if there is, it's probably going to be either it's going to be BS, like the media sets it up and makes it impossible, or they're like, oh, here, let's do pre-recorded video responses back and forth. Or it's going to be, basically Trump fighting the moderator, like it was what it always ends up being. Basically, some far left moderator starts asserting things and fact checking when they're wrong, even. I don't know. I think that this next time until November is going to move pretty fast. I think people are going to be really surprised. So, hey, looks like the rioters are finally getting cracked down on. It looks like Trump's got the mandate. Wisconsin got the message, finally sent in the police and National Guard. It's finally a losing issue for Democrats, so suddenly it has to be cleaned up. Things are getting better. And I think things will get better. And, barring anything utterly insane, like full-scale election cheating and other nonsense, or some sort of attack or war that ends up occurring that, just out of nowhere. I think we're in pretty good shape going into 2021. We'll find out. We're going to find out. We're on this roller coaster whether we like it or not. But hey, here's to the future.